The night my stepfather tried to forge my signature on documents transferring 12 luxury hotels into his name, I was standing right behind him. He didn't hear me enter the study. His hands were shaking as he traced my signature over and over on practice sheets, whispering numbers to himself. $800 million. That's what my family's empire was worth. And this man, who had been in our lives for less than 2 years, was about to steal every single cent of it while my mother slept upstairs, completely oblivious to the monster she had married. I was 24 years old when my grandmother died, and I thought I understood grief. I thought I understood loss. But nothing prepared me for the moment her lawyer called me into that mahogany-paneled conference room 3 days after her funeral and told me that everything was mine. Not some of it. Not a trust fund. Everything. The Belmont Hotel in Manhattan. The Grandview Resort in Monaco. The Azure Coast properties in the French Riviera. The mountain lodges in Switzerland. The beachfront paradises in Maldives. 12 properties total, each one worth more than most people see in 10 lifetimes. My grandmother had built this empire from a single bed and breakfast she inherited from her own mother, and she had turned it into one of the most exclusive luxury hotel chains in the world. And she left it all to me. My mother sat beside me in that conference room, her face pale, her hands gripping her handbag so tight her knuckles went white. She had expected to inherit everything. She was the only child after all. But my grandmother's will was crystal clear, and her reasoning was written in her own hand in a sealed letter the lawyer gave me afterward. She wrote that my mother had never shown interest in the business, that she had spent her entire adult life chasing men instead of purpose, and that I was the only one who had ever cared about the hotels, about the legacy, about the employees who depended on us. She said I had her mind for business and her heart for people, and she trusted me completely. I cried reading that letter. I cried for hours. My mother barely spoke to me for 2 weeks after that reading. And when she finally did, she brought him with her. Derek Whitmore walked into my life exactly 18 days after I became one of the wealthiest young women in America. My mother introduced him as her new boyfriend, someone she had met at a charity gala 6 months earlier. He was handsome in that polished, calculated way, with silver hair at his temples and a smile that looked practiced in a mirror. He worked in private equity, she said. He had excellent taste. He made her feel young again. I smiled and shook his hand and felt every instinct in my body scream. The first dinner we had together, he asked me about the hotels. Casual questions at first. How many properties exactly? What were the occupancy rates? Did I plan to expand or sell? My mother laughed and told him to stop talking business, but he didn't stop. He kept circling back to it, his eyes too bright, his questions too specific. He wanted to know who managed the legal documents, who had access to the accounts, whether I had a board of directors or if all decisions were mine alone. I kept my answers vague, pleasant, distant. But I watched him, and I saw the way he looked at me. Not like a potential stepfather. Not even like a family member. He looked at me like I was a vault he was trying to crack. 3 months later, he and my mother got married in a private ceremony in the Bahamas. I wasn't invited. My mother called me afterward, giddy and apologetic, saying it had been spontaneous, romantic, just the two of them and the sunset. I told her I was happy for her. I lied. Because by then, Derek had already started asking me to call him Dad. They moved into the penthouse suite at the Manhattan Belmont 6 weeks after their wedding. My mother said it was temporary, just until they found the perfect apartment to buy together. But weeks turned into months, and Derek made himself comfortable in ways that made my skin crawl. He started showing up at my office unannounced. He would walk in with coffee, with pastries, with that perfect smile, and he would sit down across from my desk like he had every right to be there. He wanted to help, he said. He had experience with acquisitions and mergers. He knew people who could expand our brand into Asia, into South America, into markets we hadn't even considered. I thanked him politely and told him I had an excellent team already. His smile would tighten just slightly, just enough for me to notice, before he'd nod and change the subject. He started attending meetings I hadn't invited him to. Charity board meetings, property management briefings, staff reviews. He would sit in the back of the room, silent, watching, taking notes on a leather-bound notebook he carried everywhere. When I asked him to stop, he acted hurt. He said he was just trying to be supportive, to learn about my world, to be a real family. My mother defended him, said I was being cold, that he only wanted to be involved because he cared about me. But I saw the way he studied the financial reports I left on my desk. The way his eyes tracked the signature line on contracts. The way he memorized names of lawyers, accountants, board members. He was mapping out my empire like a general planning an invasion. And then for months after moving in, he started talking about estate planning. It started subtly. A comment over breakfast about how young I was to carry such enormous responsibility alone. A suggestion that I should think about creating a partnership structure, bringing in experienced investors who could share the burden. He knew people, he said. Trustworthy people. Then came the conversations about family protection. What would happen to the hotels if something happened to me? Had I thought about that? Shouldn't my mother, his wife, have some security? Some guarantee? He suggested I add my mother to the corporate structure. Just as a safety measure, he said. Just in case. I refused every time. Always politely, always firmly. His frustration started showing in smaller ways. The forced cheerfulness that didn't reach his eyes. The way he would grip his wine glass too hard at dinner. The passive-aggressive comments about young people who thought they knew everything. My mother defended him constantly now. She said I was being paranoid, ungrateful. That Derek had given up his own career to be with her, to support our family. She started pulling away from me, choosing his side in every disagreement, no matter how small. He isolated her so perfectly she never even noticed it happening. Meanwhile, Derek got more aggressive. He started introducing himself as a co-owner of the hotels to business associates. He began signing himself into property management meetings as a family representative. He had new business cards printed with his name and our company logo. I had to send a company-wide memo clarifying that Derek Whitmore had zero authority over any business decisions and was not to be included in any meetings or given access to any confidential information without my explicit written approval. My mother screamed at me over the phone for 2 hours that night. She said I had humiliated her husband. That I was cruel. That I had changed since getting the inheritance. Derek, however, said nothing. He just smiled at me the next morning over breakfast and told me he understood. That he forgave me. That family was complicated. But his eyes were cold, calculating, and absolutely furious. That's when I hired a private investigator. The private investigator's first report arrived 3 weeks later, and it confirmed what my gut had been screaming since the day I met Derek Whitmore. His real name was Derek Wickham. He had changed it legally 4 years ago. He didn't work in private equity. He had worked in private equity 15 years ago, before he was fired for attempting to embezzle funds from a client's account. The case had been settled quietly out of court with a non-disclosure agreement. Since then he had married 3 times. Each wife had been wealthy. Each marriage had ended with the wife significantly poorer and Derek significantly richer. There were restraining orders. There were lawsuits. There were sealed court documents my investigator couldn't access, but the pattern was clear. Derek Whitmore was a professional predator, and my mother was his latest mark. But this time he wasn't just after her money. She didn't have any. He was after mine. The report included surveillance photos. Derek meeting with lawyers I didn't know. Derek having lunch with a notary public. Derek spending hours at business libraries researching corporate law and inheritance structures. He was planning something. I doubled security at all properties. I put alerts on every single company account. I scheduled a meeting with my legal team to bulletproof every document that had my name on it. But I wasn't fast enough. 2 days later, I received a call from my bank. Someone had attempted to access my primary business account using forged authorization documents. The signatures looked perfect, the paperwork was nearly flawless, but the request itself was suspicious enough that the bank flagged it for verification before processing. Someone had tried to transfer $12 million into an offshore account. The documents were signed with my name and notarized. But I had never signed them. I had never even seen them before. The handwriting analysis came back conclusive. The forgery was sophisticated, professional, practiced. Derek had tried to steal from me, and he had almost succeeded. I didn't confront him immediately. I needed more. I needed everything. So I set a trap. I told my mother and Derek that I was going to Paris for 2 weeks to oversee renovations at our property there. I made a big show of packing, of arranging my schedule, of being stressed and distracted. Instead, I checked into a hotel 3 blocks from the Manhattan Belmont under a fake name and watched. My head of security installed hidden cameras in my office at the penthouse after obtaining a warrant based on the forgery attempt. It was completely legal, my lawyer assured me. This was my property, my office, and we had reasonable suspicion of ongoing criminal activity. Derek took the bait faster than I expected. The first night I was supposedly gone, he was in my office. My mother had gone to bed early, and he slipped in with a key he must have copied weeks ago. He went straight for my filing cabinets, photographing documents with his phone, corporate structure papers, property deeds, account information, board member contacts. The second night, he brought someone with him. A man I didn't recognize, older, professional-looking. They spread papers across my desk, and I watched through the live camera feed as this stranger explained something while pointing at documents, at signatures, at seals. He was consulting with a forger, right there in my office, planning the next attempt. But the third night was when I got everything I needed. Derek came alone again, and this time he was on the phone. The camera had audio, and I recorded every word. He was talking to someone he called Marcus. He was explaining that the first attempt had failed, but that he had a better plan now. He had found a loophole in the corporate structure, something about the fact that if my mother could be made a co-owner, even temporarily, she could then transfer her shares to him as her spouse. Community property laws, he said, would work in their favor if they filed the right paperwork in the right state. All he needed was my signature on one document. Just one. He had already practiced my signature 10,000 times, he said, laughing. He could do it in his sleep. The notary he had paid off would authenticate anything. And once the transfer was complete, once my mother technically owned half the company, the rest would be easy. He said my mother would do anything he told her to. She was weak, he said. She was desperate to be loved. She would sign whatever he put in front of her without even reading it. And then he said the part that made my blood run cold. If I fought back, if I tried to stop the transfer, he had backup plans. He knew people who could make things difficult for me. Accidents happened to wealthy young women all the time. Suspicious accidents. Fatal accidents. He wasn't joking. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, almost bored. I had married your mother to get to you, he said to Marcus over the phone. And I'm not leaving empty-handed. I had everything I needed. I called the police. I wanted to handle it quietly. I wanted to simply have him arrested, removed, erased from our lives with minimal drama. But my lawyer advised me differently. She said that without catching him in the act, without proof of attempt, a good defense attorney could argue that he was just planning, just thinking, and that thoughts weren't crimes. We needed to catch him actually forging my signature. So we set up the final trap. I returned from Paris early, making sure Derek knew I would be home that evening. My lawyer arranged for the notary Derek had been paying off to contact him, saying that I had requested an urgent meeting about estate planning documents, and that I wanted to add my mother as a beneficiary to certain holdings. The bait was irresistible. Derek took the meeting immediately. My lawyer's office was wired with cameras and microphones, all legally authorized by a judge who had reviewed the evidence of the prior forgery attempt. Police were stationed in the building, ready to move. I watched from a separate room as Derek arrived with his forger friend. The notary, who was actually working with law enforcement, presented documents that supposedly needed my signature. She said I had been delayed, that I would arrive in 20 minutes, but that Derek could review the paperwork in the meantime. I watched Derek's face light up as he read the documents. They were perfectly designed to look like exactly what he wanted. Papers that would transfer partial ownership to my mother, with Derek listed as her legal representative. The notary stepped out, saying she needed to make copies, and Derek pulled out a pen. I watched him place tracing paper over my signature on a sample document. I watched him practice the motion 3 times. And then I watched him sign my name on the official document with a confidence that made me sick. His friend pulled out an official-looking seal and stamps, preparing to forge the notarization. That's when the police walked in. Derek looked up, startled, and saw me standing in the doorway behind the officers. The expression on his face moved through confusion, shock, rage, and finally calculation in about 3 seconds. He smiled, that same perfect smile, and started to speak. I didn't let him. I pulled out my phone and played the recording from my office. His voice filled the room, talking about forging signatures, manipulating my mother, making me have an accident if necessary. His smile disappeared. He lunged at me. The officers took him down before he got within 5 feet, slamming him against the wall and cuffing his hands behind his back. He screamed at me, his face twisted with hatred, calling me names I won't repeat. He said I had ruined everything, that I owed him, that the money should have been his. His friend tried to run, and was caught in the lobby. Derek Wickham was arrested for attempted fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit theft, and making criminal threats. His bail was set at $2 million. He couldn't pay it. My mother didn't believe me at first. Even with the recordings, the evidence, the police reports, she defended him. She said I had manipulated the situation, that Derek loved her, that this was all a misunderstanding. It took her 3 days to ask to hear the recordings herself. I played her the part where Derek called her weak and desperate, where he said he had married her just to get to me, where he laughed about how easy she was to control. She listened to the whole thing in silence, sitting in my living room with tears streaming down her face. Then she got up, walked to the bathroom, and threw up. She filed for divorce the next day. An annulment actually based on fraud. The marriage was dissolved within a month. Derek's trial took 8 months. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. His previous victims came forward during sentencing, and the judge showed no mercy. I never saw him again after that day in the lawyer's office. My mother and I went to therapy together. It took a long time for us to repair what Derek had broken, but we did. She apologized for choosing him over me, for not seeing what he was, for putting me in danger. I forgave her, because she was a victim too. The hotels thrived. I expanded into 3 new markets in Asia, opened a sustainability-focused property in Costa Rica, and launched a scholarship program for hospitality students in my grandmother's name. The Belmont Empire grew stronger than ever. But I learned something important through all of this. Wealth attracts predators. Success breeds jealousy. And family, real family, is defined not by blood or marriage, but by who stands beside you when everything is at risk. My grandmother knew that when she left everything to me, she knew I would have to fight for it. She knew some people would see me as a target instead of a person. And she trusted that I was strong enough to win. She was right. Derek Whitmore tried to steal my inheritance, my family, and my life. Instead, he lost everything. And I built an empire he could never have imagined in his greediest dreams. That's my story. The story of how I inherited luxury hotels worth hundreds of millions, and how my mother's husband went insane with greed. But it's also the story of how I learned that the greatest inheritance my grandmother gave me wasn't money. It was the strength to protect what's mine.